What was your scariest, a second later and I would have died, moment? I crossed the road behind a tram, not seeing the track beside it going the other direction. The oncoming tram missed me by inches. My dad and I were driving down the road after heavy rainfall in Vermont. He is driving, and I am fiddling with the radio. I hear a very loud crack, and before I can ask my dad what it was, out of the corner of my eye I see movement. An entire tree was falling on the road. Due to the heavy rainfall, the dirt was too wet to keep some trees in place. My dad stood on his brake, cartoon style, and we slid nearly right into the tree. I heard a pop before we fully stopped, and when we lurched back to 0 miles per hour, we were both breathing hard. My dad got out to check the damage, and the pop I hear was a branch hitting a headlight out. First time I've ever seen my dad call 911. It was scary. Could have been the end of us if he didn't stop to chat to the waitress after we left the restaurant to go home. I briefly looked at my phone to skip a song on Spotify and barely missed walking right in front of my neighbor's truck. I didn't notice at the time, and was actually told by said neighbor the next day. It's a weird feeling knowing that you were completely oblivious to almost dying. A couple months ago, I was in a head-on collision with some dude on crack driving down the wrong side of the road with his headlights out. I was going probably around 50 before I saw him. Speed limit was 55, so that's my best guess. Saw him with a second or two of reaction time. Managed to brake hard and swerve over only bad enough to total my car, but I still walked away with nothing more than a sore neck. If I hadn't seen the dude, I don't doubt that I could have died or been seriously injured. This comment was deleted in response to Reddit's June 2023 API changes. Consider migrating to Cabin or Lemmy. When I was about 9 or 10, I was in the basement helping my grandma do laundry. She had a big braided rug on the floor and I was bouncing all over the place. I was wearing socks and jumping on and off the rug. She bends over to get something out of the dryer and reaches across the rug to grab something. I realize what she's reaching for is a snake, just inches between the two of us. I yell at her to stop. We both scream and the snake quickly takes on an aggressive posture. I run outside and grab a broom and my grandma starts beating the poor thing to death with it. Grandpa hears the commotion and rushes downstairs and delivers the fatal blow. Turns out that little nope noodle that snuck into the house was a venomous copperhead. On the 16th of December 2004, I was with a friend having a beer in a bar on the Khao San Road in Bangkok, Thailand. It was the last week of my bumming round the world and we had a decision to make. Do we go home for Christmas or spend it on the beach in Phuket? Neither of us had been to Phuket and we thought it would be an awesome end to living out of a backpack for the last 18 months, but on the other hand, Christmas at home with the family was also appealing. So we flipped a coin and went home to the UK. Flipping that coin a second earlier or later could have sent us into the path of the 2004 Boxing Day tsunami. A friend asked for a ride on my motorcycle, so I let him wear the spare helmet and took him for seafood at Neptune's Net in Malibu. Some of the nearby beach houses have driveways that lead directly onto the highway. So, while we were on the return trip back towards Santa Monica, an SUV pulls onto my lane. There was absolutely no time to brake. As a precaution against this kind of thing, I always watch the wheels of parked vehicles for movement and I always rest a thumb on the horn. So I see trouble brewing. Honk as soon as the other vehicle starts to move and change lanes. The driver of that SUV neither saw me coming nor responded to the horn. The only reason we didn't have a T-bone collision was because of that lane change. I skirted around it with about 1.5 feet to spare. It wasn't the closest call I've ever had, but it was the only one where I was responsible for another person. I would have known to leap off the seat just before impact, but the passenger wouldn't. It turned out later he didn't even realize we'd nearly been in an accident, probably because his head was turned to enjoy the ocean view. The laws of physics made that swerve especially difficult because I'm a slender woman. The passenger weighed 40 pounds more than me. Earlier this week, I saw a young guy almost get killed by a tram. He wasn't listening to music or anything, but it was early in the AM and he barely caught it out of the corner of his eye. The first thing he did was a textbook Wilhelm scream, and then he noticed me looking and said, "Well, I'm awake now." It passed probably 2 centimeters in front of his nose edit. 1 second earlier, whatever. I don't know if I would have died, but when I was very small, I woke up in the middle of the night with a feeling like the dog was missing. I woke up everyone in the house and we went looking for the dog. Somehow, we were all outside when a Molotov cocktail was thrown into the neighbor's house and their house exploded, setting only one room in our house on fire, mine and my sister's. If I hadn't had everyone frantically searching for the dog, who knows what would have happened. The dog must have known something was up, too, because she had gotten out of the house and was hiding under a porch across the street. I did some volunteering abroad in a place that had a ton of feral street dogs. Usually they minded their own business and were easily scared away. I tended to carry a piece of rebar in my backpack for this purpose, but occasionally they would gang up and maul people, generally kids and old people. One night I got woken up by the sound of a bunch of them barking and howling. I wouldn't have minded, except I also heard the sound of a woman screaming. I ran out into the street to check it out, turned a corner and saw the biggest pack of them I'd ever seen, like 30 dogs, all circling around this lady. I started yelling and throwing rocks, thinking they'd scatter, which is when the whole pack immediately turned their attention towards me. They were coming at me with their teeth bared and their ears back, and I remember being really intensely aware of the thought, okay, I'm going to die right now. It was at that moment that a dude in a rickshaw came tearing down the road, flashing his lights and honking. This made the dogs bolt. Driver saved my life, or at the very least prevented a wicked bad mauling. It was a really great affirmation about how most people will do what they can to help you when you need it. Not really a time thing as much as a distance thing. I was at a car festival, BMW E30 Fest, and this modified BMW E30 with a 4.4 supercharged V8, 400 horsepower-ish, was doing a burnout in 3rd gear, so the wheels were spinning, probably at like 80 miles per hour, something like that. Anyway, the car moved a bit forward and I just hear, whoosh asterisk pating asterisk, and this walnut-sized rock just flew straight past my ear. My best friend and I just locked eyes and went, whoa, and then continued watching. I just don't want to know what a walnut-sized rock does to a human head when it's traveling 80 miles per hour. Later, we got drunk and watched flames shoot from exhausts. Was fun. Had a bad hangover and was kind of nervous, jittery, which in turn made me extra watchful. I was driving home, light turned green and I started to go. Car going about 45 in crowded city traffic gives no and goes right through the red. I slammed on the brakes and felt my anti-lock brakes engage for the first time in I don't know how long. Guy missed me by inches. Didn't even slow down. Had I not been hungover, I doubt I would have given the cross traffic that second look to see him barreling toward me. He likely would have T-boned me right in the driver's door. When I was in junior high, I was carpooling with another kid and her mom. For a reason I can't fathom, she decided to race a transit train, hoping to get across the tracks before the train stopped traffic. She gunned the car. I was in the back seat screaming no. She hit the train. Because I was in the back seat, I was injured the least. I had a pointy piece of metal pierce through my jeans and flesh until it hit bone. Had she been a second faster, the train would have hit us broadside and killed us all. Edit to answer the questions. This was 1980. She was not charged or sued. It was labeled an accident. She and her daughter suffered broken bones, lacerations, and concussions. Because of the parental acrimony, I couldn't be friends with the girl anymore. The family moved away before the end of the school year. I know at the time her mom was still not working. I'm not sure if she ever went back to work. Clearly, she had developed some kind of mental or emotional problem, which the accident probably made worse. I wondered if she was an alcoholic who began day drinking, but I never mentioned my suspicion to anyone. I needed crutches for a few months. Once I almost stepped on a scorpion fish. That was a close call, believe me. It was in no more than 3 feet of water in plain sand, so be careful everyone. Back when I managed a clothing store, I had to walk from the mall to the bank every morning to drop off the deposit. To get to the bank, I had to cross one street at a 4-way intersection. One day as I was making my way across, a van was in the middle of the intersection waiting to turn left and was patiently waiting as I had the right to cross the street. Some douche in a black sports car apparently couldn't wait and swerved around the van and almost ran straight into me. Car was so close I could feel it behind my legs and everything went in slow motion. Good thing I thought to start speeding up as I saw the lights start to flash, signaling the end of being able to cross, or I could have been hit. The sped away and I ran to the other end of the crosswalk A-okay. I was on the phone with my now husband when this went down and he heard everything. I broke down crying when I got to the other side, and it wasn't because I was almost hit. The thought that my husband could have heard my death is what shook me up. My backpack got hit by a car while I was wearing it. Knocked me flat on my ass, but I was okay. I was walking home at 2 a.m. and these guys in a truck started trying to run me over, and at the last second I dived into a small wooded bramble area and went the 7 feet to fence behind it. AMD hid. They then tried to find me for a while and left. I waited for an hour, probably then decided to sneak out. I saw their truck sitting at the end of the alley with no power on, so I snuck along the wooded area till it merged with the road and made a break for it. They almost ran me over again, but I made it to the path behind a house that was too narrow for them to fit. Probably 2 seconds from being ran over both times. Not me, but my dad decided to stay for one more drink at a bar after work back in 1989. If he left before that last drink, he would have been on the Old Bay Bridge, very close if not under the section that collapsed during the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake. I was walking into a miller's outpost, tells you the time period, and the M from the sign above the store fell down and hit me on the shoulder. It was a big glass sign. One moment sooner and it hits my head. Because it drew blood, the store offered to give me any item I wanted so I wouldn't sue. I chose an awful red cardigan. I was 16 and dumb. I was working on a pipe crew in 1998. We were installing a large concrete vault in a pretty big hole. I'm standing in a ditch about 6 feet deep marking grade while the excavator operator is digging. So to the front of me is a large excavator bucket, itself weighing hundreds of pounds and backed by powerful hydraulics and thousands of pounds of steel armature, and behind me is a solid concrete wall about a foot thick. And the ditch is only a few feet wide and too tall for me to jump or climb out of with any kind of speed. Suddenly, the excavator spins to one side and the arm snaps out to full extension with full force, and the operator shuts it down. The bucket missed my head by about a foot. He climbs out of the machine, visibly shaken, and tells me that something has failed on the machine and the arm wasn't supposed to have done that. So as he's been digging, he's been noticing that ever so slightly there's a bit of a delay between his inputs and the machine's actions, and in the moment before failure, he just felt something wasn't right and tried to pull the bucket in. When it didn't seem to want to, he turned the excavator, just in case, and that's when the arm extended. Had he not, I would have been crushed to death. There were 2 other excavator operators on that crew, and they were basically idiots. Had one of them been with us that day, I'm sure I'd be dead. I was freshman in college and came back to my hometown for fall break. I decided to go to a football game to hang out with some old friends. On the way home, I stopped at a red light, and when it turned green, I pulled forward, as usual. From the left, a truck suddenly hit me. He was speeding and ran the red light, T-boned me right in front of my driver's door. I luckily got out with just an injured knee and fractured clavicle and some bruising. It haunted me for a while that, had I pulled forward just a little faster or he had been just a quarter second slower, he would have gone straight into my driver's door and I likely wouldn't have made it. He wasn't even drunk or under the influence. It was just a 16-year-old kid not paying attention. Went to a corner store for a drink. Literally 2 minutes after I left, someone robbed it and shot the cashier and another person in the store. Edit. Well, this blew up. I was like 6 or 7 when my dad and I were driving to his parents' summer cabin. Suddenly, a huge moose runs from the forest, from our right, and across the road. I mean, there's no small moose, let's get that straight. But this was out of this world huge asterisk. And we avoided hitting it by literally just a second. It was so close that I'm sure we would have hit it if either we or the moose gained a second somewhere. We would have been dead for sure. Hitting a moose with car is almost surely a death sentence anyway, but that thing was just so extra large that there would have been no chance. Got one. Rolled up over a small hill and signaled left. No oncoming traffic, so I drift to the middle of the road on a lazy North Main highway. Start to slow and hear screeching brakes. Look to the rear view and only see grill of the pulp truck that just barreled over the hill. Impact. My truck is whipped around until I'm basically driver door to driver door with this semi. We slide across the oncoming lane and my truck drops into the ditch, but the pulp truck keeps going. The back of the rig starts tearing up my hood, then hits the crossbar by the door. More shattering glass. The whole side of the car begins to crumple towards me like a tin can. Can't tell if it's real time or I'm going to die slow-mo. Trailer and what's left of my truck stops about 8 inches from my face, chest. Breath and exit with almost no injury. Holy fucking shit. Edit. Spelling. Driving on a country road at night with a mate who just got his license, anyways doing 80 kilometers per hour and all the lights died. It was nearly pitch black and he slams on the brakes, car stops, lights come back on and we were greeted with a sharp bend sign and a sheer cliff 50 meters further on down the road with a 30 meters drop off into the ocean. That was scary and a tense ride home. I cannot confirm whether this would have been death, however it would have changed my and my parents' life like death. I was about 6 or 7 and I went along with my mom to go train the new puppy we had. The training ground was quite far away from home and I remember that it was a big field surrounded by a forest and a motorway on the side of it. I was told to stay in the car and play on my Game Boy, back when they were a thing lol. After an hour or so, I got bored and I went to have a look at where my mum was with our puppy. The car park was a little while from the training ground, but I decided to walk towards her anyway. In the meantime, an older man, 30-ish, starts talking to me, and the naive little boy I talked back, regardless of all the times my mom told me to not talk to strangers. He convinced me I was going the wrong way and told me he would take me to my mom and puppy has. We ended up by the motorway side, and we were about to walk down the bank to the side of the motorway where his car was parked. As I am about to disappear down the bank, I hear the loudest scream of my name from my mom. I look back and feel the grip of the man tighten on my hand, but I was just in time to get my hand out of his grip and run towards my mother. My mom runs past me to see where this guy is, but he had just got into his car and drove off. To this day, I still imagine about the what-if scenario and how close I was to being kidnapped and potentially killed. When I was 5 or 6, we were on holidays in Australia. My mother took me to a beach that is known because it's safe thanks to a net system that doesn't let the sharks in. Well, when we arrived, the beach was empty, what was kinda strange, but we continued to have a beach day and we had a bath. My mother even swam from one point to another. After that, we were going to the car, and some authorities saw us. They told us to not enter the beach, because a family of alligators had entered in the water, and it was really dangerous. Outside my college dorm my freshman year, there was this stoop that was half under the building, half out from under it. The building was 18 stories tall. So I'm sitting out there, sitting on the steps, not under the building, and I get up for no real reason and walk under the building. As soon as I get under the building, a huge sheet of glass falls right where I was sitting. Some idiots were messing around on the 11th floor and knocked a 10-by-9 window pane out of its mooring. I passed out at work and came around in the hospital. They diagnosed a bleed on the brain and eventually decided to drill a hole in my skull to drain the fluid. Just as they were about to put me under, the phone rang. It was the head of neurology. I actually had a burst aneurysm. According to my doctor, I would have probably been dead seconds after they started the surgery. I used to work on a farm for a doctor that had antelopes on the property, and one of my jobs was to feed them. My third day on the job was my first time actually doing it since my coworkers did it before. I went out there with the feed and started to pour it out so that they could eat. My supervisor shouts from the other side of the fence not to turn my back to the male antelope, and I couldn't hear him, so the first thing I did was turn my back on the male antelope to ask my supervisor what he said. Almost immediately I'd realized what I had done and turned back around to see the antelope about to skewer me. I jumped out of the way and he ripped the shirt off of my back. When I was in middle school, I called my mom on my cell during lunch because my head hurt so badly I couldn't move. She was one on speed dial. Well, the nurse came and brought me to the office for a checkup and some pain pills while I waited for my mom. We didn't live close. Nurse said no fever and to take me home and put me to bed. My mom watched me get into the truck and decided that maybe we should go to the hospital to be safe. By the time we reached the hospital, it was further than our home. My temp was at 104 and I was incapacitated. I had meningitis. If we went home and she put me to bed like the nurse suggested, I never would have woken up. Edit for detail. For those who keep asking, speculating it was viral meningitis, the less severe form, but it progressed very quickly. I had no headache when I arrived at school. By lunchtime, I couldn't move on my own and I couldn't see because light was too bright. The nurse came to get me and I didn't have a fever. After waiting for my mom 10 minutes and the 20-minute drive to the hospital and 10-minute wait at the hospital, it was at 104. Yes, we told the nurse after, but there was only some of the symptoms when I left school. She never gave me or my mother advice again, just told symptoms and gave pain meds. In 2009, my brother was killed by a drunk driver on a motorcycle ride. I was with him and avoided the truck by